Um, what you got there?
It's a smoothie.
I think she meant the gigantic bird.
Oh!
Hello everyone, version 7, technically 6 of our 3.2 characters has been released for a little bit, so let's take a look at what's likely their finalized versions. If there are any changes or mistakes in the video, I'll be sure to have a pinned comment, but if not, what's on the video should be accurate to their launch. I'll first go over Anaxa and a quick summary of his overall kit while going in depth for Castorice. This is because Anaxa is actually super simple to understand, while Castorice is pretty unique and gonna be another case of Aglaia, where it will take a bit to understand, but once you do, fairly simple. Before that, I want to talk about where they currently fit in regards to the meta. Prior to version 6, which was released on March 22nd, Hypercarry Anaxa and Castorice would have been the strongest DPSs as of 3.2. But after the version 6 nerfs to Anaxa, he honestly moved back down to the bottom of tier 0 or top of 0.5, which is still great by the way. Now, in regards to sub DPS Anaxa for Herda, he probably would still be in the 0.5 tier as he's no Tribi. I've seen a lot of Doom posting in their subreddit, but using this post as a reference, overall he's much stronger than his version 1 state. As for the future, as soon as the HP sustain releases, likely Hyacine, then Castorice and Mighty are probably gonna be at the top of tier 0. If they comfortably belong there now, imagine how strong they'd be once they get Sustain, who isn't Galagad or Hoho. Especially Castorice, who is currently bottlenecked due to this Sustain, which I'll cover later. So with that out the way, let's start with Anaxa, which we can start with his base stats. Anaxa currently has the second highest base attack under Doctor Ratio, sitting at 757. He has 97 speed, which puts him on the lower end of the speed spectrum and makes it a bit tricky to hit that 134 mark. As for his traces, he currently has 22% damage bonus, 10% HP, and 12 crit rate. Now, diving into his kit, it would actually be best to start with his trace 2, Imperial Hiatus, as this really determines how you'll play and build Anaxa. Similar to Herda, depending on how many Erudition characters there are, you get different buffs. Now, for Hypercarry Anaxa, if he's the solo Erudition, he'll get 140 crit damage. It's because of this fact that you can run either attack body or attack orb and be just fine. Everything is extremely close and depends on teammate buffs, substats, and Lycone. From a raw perspective, using some average relics, you can see that an attack orb would be better. This is due to his buff Lycone in version 5, which provides a lot of damage percent. Moving to his best in slot Hypercarry team, we can see that attack orb is still better, while attack body is now neck and neck with crit damage. Of course, you can just use Fribbles yourself and find out how your teams or relics would fare. However, if there are 2 Erudition units, aka sub DPS and Anaxa for the Herda, he grants a team-wide damage bonus of 50%, which is really good. For reference, it's similar to giving 83% crit damage, which the Herda gives 70. Here, you would just build him with crit body, speed boots, attack or damage orb, and attack rope. Nothing too special. Moving on to his talent and unique gimmick, Anaxa has the ability to implant multiple weaknesses to enemies he attacks for 3 turns. This is amazing in a mode like Apoc Shadow, as you can now permanently brute force that mode. Just know this isn't like Silverwolf, who can reduce resistances, so even if they are weak to the element, they still will have the damage reduction. However, his third trace does give him a defense ignore up to 28% depending on how many weaknesses there are, which is roughly 18% damage increase for him. Now, if an enemy target has at least 5 weaknesses, they enter the qualitative disclosure state. The main thing to note is that 2 things occur when Anaxa attacks an enemy with 5 weaknesses. 1, he deals 30% more damage, and 2, his attacks, basic or skill, will cast an additional skill. And this is pretty dang massive, as we'll later see. Moving on to his basic, it's nothing special with a multiplier of 100%, but we'll come back to it pretty soon. Now, to his bread and butter, his skill, Fractal Exile's Fallacy. This is a bounce attack which attacks 5 times, prioritizing enemies that haven't been hit. As of version 6, this has a total multiplier of 350% attack, which initially started at 300 in version 1, bumping up to 400 in version 4, and now finally 350 in version 6, which was a 12.5% damage decrease, which when paired with another version 6 nerf with his old, bumped them down a bit, but overall a 17% damage increase. The second half of the skill grants him 20 to 100% extra damage bonus, scaling on the amount of enemies present on the field, which was added in version 3 and buffed in version 4. To balance this addition, they nerfed his talent damage bonus. Overall, this went from a flat 60% damage bonus from the trace in version 1 to now varying amounts from 50 to 130 from the trace and second half of the skill, which is definitely an upgrade. Now, the 350 skill multiplier alone is really good. Using Jingliu's skill as reference, that only has a multiplier of 500%. But remember how his talent gives him an additional skill? Yeah, he now has a multiplier of 450% when using his basic attack and a 700% multiplier if he skills. For reference, Fei Xiao's ultimate has a 700% multiplier. Version 4's 800% was freaking crazy, but even at 700% with the rest of his kit, he's still a top tier DPS. And because this is a bounce attack, this makes him crazy in single target while still being great in blast and AoE. In a 5 target situation, the average damage per enemy is 140%, which is still above the likes of Jade follow-up attack or most of the AoE skills which have a multiplier of 100. His ultimate is an AoE attack which deals 160% to every enemy, which was nerfed in version 6 from 200, which now makes his ult slightly below the average, which is 200%. That part isn't too interesting, but what is the sublimation state. When Anaxa uses his ult, targets will now have all 7 weaknesses implanted until the start of their next turn. During this time, if the enemy does not have control effect res, which is most enemies besides certain bosses, they cannot take action until it's their next turn. Well, isn't that normal where they can't take action when it's not their turn? Yes, but this does have some cool interactions. Primarily, this is super useful in interrupting a boss's extra action. Does Kafka want to capture you? Say no to grooming. You know that stupid Arumaton who loves to box you like a fish? Well, you can just tell him to piss off. Now, his ult is a 140 cost ult. Assuming you can do his extra skill every time, you are generating 60 energy per instance. Do that 2 times and that gets you to 125. We're a bit short from that 2-turn ult. That's where the light cone comes in. Yeah, kinda sucks, but oh well. If you decide to get E1 or S1, probably go S1. Now, before moving on to his Eidolons, we'll just finish up with the second half of Trace 1, which grants some energy on his turn if there are no enemies with 5 weaknesses on the field. TLDR, you should be getting 30 energy at the start of any wave. 2, this can potentially keep granting 30 energy if you can wipe out an entire wave so no enemies in a qualitative disclosure state, which can happen in the first stage of Pure Fiction or Calyxes. But also 3, this can potentially not work at all if an enemy just spawns in with at least 5 weaknesses. Unlikely, but possible. Finally, his Eidolons. I don't really want to dwell on them too long, so I'll just skim over it. E1 is kinda meh. E2 is pretty good as a supportive Eidolon, but nothing crazy like the hypercarry Eidolons that we're pretty used to seeing. His E4 is actually better than a lot of other DPS's E4 because they usually suck. Also, while this only gives 60% attack now, it used to give 120% attack prior to version 4, which is insane by the way, and would have easily been the best E4 in the game and better than most characters E1 and 2. His E6 has been buffed over time with the changes on the screen, but the biggest buff would be how he can now grant a damage percent bonus and also gain the crit damage from his second trace regardless the amount of Eurydition units on the team. In conclusion, this guy has a 700% skill multiplier, Omega self buffs, can implant weaknesses, and also interrupt extra turns. His best in slot teams, whether Hypercarry or Thirda, are currently available so you can instantly go ham with them. Honestly, kinda reminds me of Jingliu in a sense where everything was already set up for them. Moving on to Rice, before we start covering her, perhaps a quick TLDR. She is a quantum DPS whose majority damage will be coming from her Memo Sprite, aka the opposite of Aglaya. She as an HP scaler also has 2 distinct playstyles which I'll cover in a bit. While her damage did get nerfed in version 3, she got a lot of quality life changes which more than made up for it. While some people wanted a more high risk, high reward playstyle, her current one is just fine. With that introduction out the way, let's get on with Miss Castorice. Starting with her base stats, she'll have the highest base HP in the game, sitting at 1630. And because of her high base HP, she'll scale a bit better with HP percent substats. As for all the other stats, they do not matter whatsoever, even speed, which is at 95. This is because you should be running the Poet set, where we actually want to have anything below 95 speed. So while you can have some speed substats, just make sure you don't go over the 95 limit. As you may have noticed, she has 0 energy, which means she's gonna have some funny mechanic just like Acheron. But before I get to that, here are her traces. A full offensive spread, which is great. We'll first start with her ultimate, Doomshriek Dawn's Chime. When Rice casts her ultimate, a lot of different things happen. Firstly, we summon her memo sprite, Netherwing, which I'll just be calling Dragon for the rest of the video. Now, the dragon has a few different rules and things to remember. 1. When the dragon is on the field, create a territory, which grants a 20% all-type res down on all enemies, which disappears when the dragon disappears. 2. The dragon itself has 165 speed, and its total HP is equal to his new bud points, which I'll get to soon. 3. The dragon disappears after A, acting 3 times, or B, the HP reaches 0. Everything is very straightforward, but what exactly is New Bud? This is where the talent comes in. Basically, New Bud is Castorice's ult charge and the dragon's HP pool. While this HP pool has changed various times throughout the beta, it currently sits at 34,000. This is for Equilibrium 5 and above, with 4 and below following a different formula. Now, the dragon's total HP does not affect damage. The main thing to note is that our goal is to fill up that 34,000 HP fuel tank as fast as possible. And how exactly do we do that? Well, every HP point lost by allies will charge New Bud and subsequently heal the dragon if it's alive. Now, the final part to the talent is that Castorice's Inner Dragon will increase their damage dealt up to 60% when allies lose HP. Of course, losing HP normally will take way too long, so that's where Castorice comes into play. Her basic is basic and nothing to note. Now what is would be her skill. She has 2 versions of her skill. The first is when the dragon is not present, where she'll use Silence, Rayfly's Caress. Here, rather than consuming skill points, she consumes 30% of all allies' HP to deal blast attack of 30, 50, 30% of her HP. The enhanced version is when the dragon is up, where she'll perform a joint attack, Boneclaw, Doomdrake's Embrace, which will consume 40% of her allies' HP and subsequently dealing a total of 80% HP to all enemies. In a 5-target scenario, it'll deal 300% HP, which for reference, Mighty's enhanced skill, Kingslayer Beat King, deals 286. So yeah, it surprisingly deals a lot of damage. But again, Castorice's skill is not where most of the damage is coming from, as she's more so the battery. Instead, it's Netherwing dealing most of the work. When it's the dragon's turn, it has 2 attacks. The first is its basic claw attack, which it deals AoE damage equal to 30% of Castorice's HP. Now, its skill is where the damage comes in. When you use the dragon's breath attack, it will consume 25% of the dragon's HP to attack all enemies on the field. As you could expect, you can attack multiple times, dealing increased damage every time, starting at 24 to 28 and ending with 34% HP. But what happens when the dragon's HP reaches 0? Well, it self-destructs and activates its third trace, Wing Sweep the Ruins, which is a nuke that deals a total of 240% of Cass's HP to one enemy, which is slightly more than Mighty's second enhanced skill. Also, it heals all allies equal to 6% of Cass's HP, plus 800, which likely averages around to 1200 HP recovered. Now, what if you don't need all the breath attacks or want the dragon to self-destruct too early? Well, you can just end the attack by finishing off the combo with a basic attack. Now, here's where the 2 playstyles come in. Remember how we could use the dragon up to 3 times? Well, we can either A, use the dragon 3 times before it self-destructs by attacking as often as we can, but then not enough to self-destruct. Heal it back and rinse and repeat until it does. Or B, just blow it up as soon as you can. But which way would be the optimal way to play? Now, it of course depends on the situation, but I believe currently, if it's an AoE situation, we want to spam the breath attacks as it has a much higher scaling. But if it's single target, we may just be better off spamming the self-destruct as the bounce is better for single target. Now, you may be wondering, wouldn't losing 34,000 HP in one cycle be nearly impossible to keep up with a near 100% uptime for the dragon? Yes, that's correct. but this is where Castorice's first trace comes in. Previously, her trace 2 made it so Overheal would convert to New Bud and restore the dragon's HP. But now, her trace 1 makes it so that any ally heals can convert to New Bud, up to 12% per character. This change in version 3 made Castorice dramatically easier to play. Now, going back to her dragon skill, while you can normally get 4 skills in, if you manage to heal the dragon while it's attacking, for example, attacking an enemy that Gallagher marked, you can actually fit in one more breath attack. Instead of going from 100 to 75, 50, 25 dead, you would instead go from 100, 80, 55, 30, 5 dead. Yeah, pretty neat. Now, her first trace is uber important if you pay attention to the wording. You can get 12% per character. So while something like Gallagher's skill heal can get 12% charge, what happens if it's an AoE heal? Yeah, you can get Giga Charge, which means she has crazy potential. For example, if you have 3 allies with Memo Sprites and all of them got healed for the max value of 40-80, that's 84% of Castorice's ult right there, or 100% if you had E2. This of course applies to Castorice's skill, which drains all allies' HP, including Memo Sprites. Of course, this is just speculation, but there's a high chance that Hyacinth will be made just for Castorice. And if we look at the Giant Tree Planar ornament, that's probably how she's gonna play like. But with that, we're now almost done for Kit, leaving some traces and Eidolons. The Dragon's Talent 1 makes it so that Netherwing becomes your team's HP reserve, which if an enemy manages to deal lethal damage to an ally, instead of the ally going down, they live with 1 HP and Netherwing instead absorbs the remaining damage at a 500% ratio. This is pretty cool and acts like an overheal of sorts, though this of course can reduce your damage. Its talent 2 is very simple and just grants a 10% damage bonus to allies for 3 turns after it's summoned. For cast, her Trace 2, which was originally Trace 1, gives casters 40% speed or 38 speed, if her HP is above 50%. This will help push her close to the 134 threshold if you plan on her acting twice in the 0th cycle. Assuming you get some speed substats with the Poet set, you can potentially reach 133 speed, but I wouldn't count on it. Overall, it's a very finicky talent. With version 6, this got buffed with Netherwing potentially getting 100% speed for 1 turn if it manages to kill all the enemies on the field or they can't lose any more HP by its Dragon's Breath. As I've heard people mention, it's a really nice buff in the first wave of Pure Fiction, but also it's really nice in modes like Apoc Shadow or MOC when a boss switches phases or when you move on to the next wave. Finishing this section, we have her Trace 3, which was originally her E2, where every breath attack would be gaining 30% damage bonus up to 6 stacks. This of course is a lot, and how much you get will vary, but generally expect up to 4 or 5 stacks. Now, moving to her Eidolons, they're quite strong as you expect, but also kinda weird. Her version 6 E1 grants her a new multiplier if the enemy reaches below certain thresholds of HP. They are independent multipliers, so it's a raw 20 and 40% final damage increase, which as you'd expect is really damn strong. In version 6, they also added a new function where if the enemy HP is lower than Castorice's max HP, it applies the 40% damage increase, which is great against super weak enemies who would normally instantly die. That way her E1 still works. Now, if you had to choose her E1 or S1, definitely go S1. Now, what exactly is her signature Lycone? Well, it's a stat stick which also gives her HP, some action advance, and most importantly, that defense ignore. 30% total defense rate at a baseline is a 19% damage increase, which in itself is really good. Now the thing is, you can pair this with something like Pela with S5 Pearls to bump that defense rate to nearly 90%. Rather than it just being a 47% damage increase, it instead becomes a 73% increase. For reference, Chibi's Res Pen and Vulnerability alone should generally be granting a 54% damage increase. Of course, I'm not including her personal damage, signature Lycone, Dance Dance Dance, or her E1, but for comparison's sake, Pela actually buffs her damage more if you have E1. Her E2 does a lot of different things, but honestly, it's all over the place. Firstly, when casting her ult, Cass gains 2 thingies called Argent Will, where the dragon will consume these stacks instead of its HP. This is great for the first breath attack, but then it's gone right after. She also gains 100% action advance, which actually kinda sucks because you action advance in front of the dragon and not after, which means you're healing the full HP dragon. But oh well. This action advance is actually for the final part of her E2, which is the most important. When she uses her enhanced skill, she will generate 30% of the new blood points for the next rotation. This means the total HP needed to get the full ult charge is now only 23,800 HP. I saw another comment say this, but you can think about it like if the Herda had a 150 ult cost instead of 220. With this, you can probably do some crazy rotation in the future and perma self-destruct the dragon as you can just instantly bring it back online. Her E4 grants a 20% healing bonus to the team, which while on paper doesn't increase your damage, it has 2 potential extra effects. 1, you can charge Castorice's ult better, and 2, this potentially can help you get an extra breath attack if you manage to heal enough while using said attack. Now, the final version of Castorice's E6 does a few things. 1, 20% res pen, 2, gives 3 more instances to the bounce nuke, and 3, which was added in version 6, gives her dragon weakness ignore, which by the way is not as OP as I've seen certain people talk about. The res pen is what lets something like E6 Acheron brute force non-matching elements, not the weakness ignore, okay? Overall, as you'd expect, she's really dang strong. She got crazy health buffs and a really high future potential. But yeah, that's the video. I hope this has helped you better understand Anaxa and Castorice, and perhaps you can better understand how to play or build these characters. Future you here, I just want to say that the 3.2 livestream was actually dope as hell. If you guys want to talk about that or the 3.2 characters, I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts in the comments. I already have my next few video ideas planned out, but now I just gotta make them. But thankfully the next one is gonna be pretty easy to make, so hopefully it'll come out 1 week from now. Besides that, I hope y'all have a wonderful day and peace.